y bienestar. Esta mesa es acerca de emociones y bienestar, emotion and wellness. Y primeramente presentará el doctor Jean-Philippe Jazé. Voy a dar una breve semblanza del doctor. El doctor Jean-Philippe es licenciado en filosofía por la Universidad de Franchemont. Es maestro de filosofía por la Universidad de Franchemont.
Franche-Comté. Comté.
Tiene un máster en Ciencias Cognitivas por la École Polytechnique de Francia. Es doctorado en filosofía contemporánea por la UEM. Actualmente está adscrito al 5 en la UEM y es responsable del cuerpo académico de epistemología y ciencias cognitivas. Sus líneas de investigaciones son sobre cognición situada, lección, fenomenología, juicios estéticos, filosofía del lenguaje, y su última publicación habla sobre Newton y los sueños, la naturaleza de los sueños, que fue publicada en Canadá en 2018. Para mí es honor cederle la palabra por su presentación de El humor negro como ética, una actitud mental cultivada por los surrealistas. Un aplauso para el doctor.
¿Funciona? Sí. Gracias. ¿Me oyen? ¿No? Pero no veré la...
Sinon, on peut mettre une chaise là, parce que le point, c'est qu'on monte la caméra.
Ah, ok.
Là.
Non, mais je vais essayer. ¿Me oyen? ¿Sí? Ok. Bueno, en 1940, el editorial Jean-Jacques Pauvert publicó Antología del humor negro, libro inmediatamente prohibido por el régimen fascista de Vichy. Los autores que figuran son escritores y artistas, pero también personas que Breton encontró en sus peregrinaciones a través del mundo y cuya vida les parecía digna de interés. Los autores son del siglo XVIII, XIX y XX, pero Breton decía que todavía existían autores que merecerían de estar en esa antología y que eran de la Edad Media o de la Antigüedad. El formato de la antología se presta a una fenomenología de la mente humorística, al contrario de una definición pedante. Breton recomienda de abordar este tema particularmente delicado con mucha precaución. El humor se concibe como una actitud, un modo de vida, y concierne tanto la ética como la estética. Si Breton reconoce en el humor el principio del único comercio intelectual de alto lujo, es precisamente porque la mente se garantiza, por medio del humor, de cierto modo contra los riesgos de alienación, en la medida en que él conserva sobre sí mismo una mirada crítica y así encuentra la manera de premunirse de las constricciones del mundo extramental. El surrealismo es una tradición literaria y artística que nació en 1924 con la publicación del primer manifiesto del surrealismo. En todo habrá como 5. Y bueno, todo empezó en 1924, ese movimiento que está inspirado por el dadaísmo. Pero los surrealistas rechazan el nihilismo del dadaísmo. Breton y Aragon, que son los fundadores, eran médicos de formación y habían tenido contacto durante la guerra, la Primera Guerra Mundial, con personas lesionadas en el frente y había asistido se había interesado a sus delirios. El surrealismo no es un antirrealismo, más bien es el realismo más el sueño. Aquí están las referencias. Ven que hay 2 libros de André Breton, la antología del humor negro y los manifiestos del surrealismo. Hay Hegel, que es el primero que utilizó la palabra humor, y Sigmund Freud, en su libro que en francés es Le mot d'esprit et ses rapports avec l'inconscient. Pero le mot d'esprit, Sigmund Freud lo llama der Witz. ¿Qué es el humor? Más bien, deberíamos empezar por decir lo que no es el humor. Y dice que lo que el humor no es, se puede nombrar la ironía socrática, la mofa, la burla, la broma sin gravedad, la fantasía a corto plazo y la sentimentalidad. Pierre Verdi, que es otro surrealista, da de la palabra humor esa definición. Es una actitud filosófica que consiste para una persona, no, eso es la ironía socrática, que no es todavía el humor, y es una actitud filosófica que consiste para una persona a hacer creer a su propia ignorancia a fin de exhibir la debilidad de la posición de otra persona y hacer de esa persona que esa persona tome conciencia de dicha debilidad. Se asimila de un cierto modo a una trampa. Y Breton no considera que eso sea una manifestación de humor. Hegel eso es lo que acaba. Hegel, en la Estética 2, introduce la noción de humor. Al decir de una palabra abstracta que una obra de arte debe ser una imitación de la naturaleza, uno parece querer imponer a la actitud del artista unos límites que le prohíben la verdadera creación. El arte debe entonces tener otra meta que la imitación puramente formal de lo que existe. Imitación que solo puede producir artificios que no tienen nada de común con una obra de arte. Observamos que la situación asignada por Hegel a las diversas artes basta para explicar que la forma de humor que interesa a los surrealistas haya aparecido más temprano en poesía que en pintura, por ejemplo. La poesía es para Hegel un arte universal que permite representar las situaciones sucesivas de la vida. Así. Okay. La intención moralizante que se manifiesta en la poesía tradicional. Hegel introduce la noción de humor objetivo. Hemos visto, dice en la Estética 2, hemos visto el interés del romanticismo fijarse a veces sobre los accidentes del mundo exterior, a veces sobre los caprichos de la personalidad. Pero ahora, si dicho interés va a hacer que la mente se absorba en la contemplación exterior y que en el mismo tiempo el humor, conservando su carácter subjetivo, se deja captivar por el objeto y su forma real, obtenemos, por medio de dicha penetración íntima, un humor de cierta manera objetivo. Breton reconoce la importancia exagerada de la racionalidad en nuestra producción, en nuestras producciones mentales, y propone otorgar más importancia a la imagen. La imagen es una creación pura de la mente, dice Pierre Reverdy, otro surrealista. No puede nacer de la comparación, sino del acercamiento de dos realidades más o menos alejadas. Cuanto más distantes y precisas sean las relaciones entre las dos realidades que se ponen en contacto, más intensa será la imagen y tendrá más fuerza emotiva y realidad poética. Pierre Reverdy. El surrealismo rechaza, eso no es la... Lo que rechazan los surrealistas son la trampa, el tradicionalismo, el conformismo, el patriotismo, el oportunismo, el escepticismo, el realismo y la falta de corazón. Entonces vemos que esas actitudes las encontramos en la sociedad francesa de la postguerra, de la post-Primera Guerra Mundial. Alors, no olvidemos que solamente la creencia en una necesidad, en cierta necesidad práctica, impide otorgar al testimonio poético un valor igual al que otorgamos, por ejemplo, al testimonio de un explorador. El surrealismo, tal como lo concibe André Breton, proclama lo bastante nuestro conformismo absoluto para que se le pueda citar en el proceso al mundo real como testigo de descargo. Por lo contrario, solo sabría justificar el estado de completa distracción que tenemos la esperanza de alcanzar aquí abajo. En el primer manifiesto del surrealismo, André Breton da esa definición del surrealismo, que es un sustantivo masculino y es el automatismo psíquico puro por cuyo miedo se intenta expresar tanto verbalmente como por escrito o de cualquier otro modo el funcionamiento real del pensamiento, dictado del pensamiento con exclusión de todo control ejercido por la razón y la margen de cualquier preocupación estética o moral. En una enciclopedia filosófica, Breton piensa que podremos encontrar: el surrealismo se basa en la creencia en la realidad superior de ciertas formas de asociación que habían sido desestimadas en la omnipotencia del sueño, en la actitud desinteresada del pensamiento, tiende a provocar la ruina definitiva de todos los otros mecanismos psíquicos y a suplantarlos en la solución de los principales problemas de la vida. Para Freud, el witz, es la palabra que traduce el humor, está relacionado con la ganancia de placer que permite obtener. El humor fue no solamente algo liberador, como el cómico o la broma, sino también lo que esas dos cosas no son, sino que también algo sublimo y elevado. El sublimo se manifiesta por el triunfo del narcisismo y la invulnerabilidad del yo, que se afirma victoriosamente. Sería tiempo, dice Freud, de familiarizarnos con ciertas características del humor. El humor tiene no solamente algo liberador, como el cómico o la broma, sino también algo sublime. El yo se rehúsa a dejarse afectar, dejarse imponer el sufrimiento por las realidades exteriores. Se rehúsa a admitir que los traumas del mundo exterior puedan tocarlo. Más pueden aún volverse oportunidades de placer. Freud trata el humor sobre el ángulo de un punto de vista económico. Él busca la fuente del placer que nos procura el humor y llega a la conclusión que el beneficio de placer debido al humor deriva del ahorro de un gasto afectivo. Cita ejemplos, el principal ejemplo es el del condenado, quien está llevado a la horca un lunes y que dice que es una semana que empieza bien. En ese caso, citado por Freud, es él que practica un proceso humorístico. El humor entero tiene como teatro su propia persona y le procura obviamente cierta satisfacción. Yo, en tanto como auditor desinteresado, soy sensible a distancia a la actitud del criminal. Yo percibo a lo mejor de forma análoga a la suya el beneficio del placer humorístico. Hay otro tipo de manifestación del humor, es cuando el escritor o el narrador que describe sobre el modo humorístico, la forma de ser de personajes reales o fictivos. Estos personajes no tienen que manifestar humor. La actitud humorística pertenece solo a quien los toma por objeto. El humor puede ser dirigido contra sí mismo o contra otra persona. Aquí están una serie de temas relacionados con el humor negro. Podemos anotar que son temas controvertidos. Actualmente diríamos que son temas que tienen que ver con las bromas no contables a todo el mundo. A continuación, para ilustrar el humor en sus diversas manifestaciones, yo presentaré varios casos. El primero sería el caso de Salvador Dalí, que ilustra la presencia del humor en la pintura. Esa obra de Salvador Dalí también funciona sobre el modo surrealista clásico del acercamiento de dos realidades. Eso es un personaje que es muy famoso en la literatura francesa, Pierre-François Lassner, que era un criminal y que consideraba que el crimen debe apreciarse en una perspectiva estética. Alors, por supuesto, los surrealistas también admiraban mucho al Marqués de Sade. Aquí viene otro artista surrealista, que es Marcel Duchamp, que que presenta un tipo de aforismos, como lo que vemos aquí. My niece is cold because my knees are cold. Y también la famosa Jocunda Mona Lisa, agrementada de un par de bigotes y de la expresión LHOOQ, que tiene un sentido en francés. Aquí es otra manifestación del humor en la realidad. Eso es el proceso de Klaus Barbie, que era un criminal de guerra alemán, que fue juzgado en 1987. Y es un caso ejemplar de defensa de ruptura. Sus abogados arguyeron del hecho de que había sido secuestrado en Bolivia para negarse a defenderlo de manera clásica. Klaus Barbie decía, no estoy legalmente aquí porque he sido secuestrado. Mi presencia aquí es solamente la consecuencia de un crimen anterior, el secuestro, y así no reconozco el derecho a ese tribunal de juzgarme. También vemos que sus abogados, las cuatro personas que están aquí, son personas de comunidades árabes, vietnamitas y congolés. Esos se supone que los nazis eran antirracistas. No, eran racistas. Y fue defendido por unos árabes, un vietnamita y un congolés. Bien, entonces el problema es cómo juzgar un crimen contra la humanidad cuando sabemos que el país que pretende juzgar, es decir, Francia, cometió crímenes contra la humanidad a la época colonial. Entonces, la estigmatización de esa contradicción es ocasión de humor. Bueno, también los comentaristas de la obra del economista y utopista Charles Fourier se preguntaron cómo explicar la coexistencia en una sola mente de competencias racionales excepcionales y el gusto por el pensamiento delirante manifestado por Fourier. Bueno, hasta aquí.
Muchas gracias. Si gustan las preguntas, las dejamos al final de la presentación. A continuación presentará la doctora Susana Ramirez Vizcaya. La doctora Susana es doctora en filosofía de las Ciencias Cognitivas por la UNAM y maestra en Ciencias Cognitivas por la UEM, por este centro. Actualmente es miembro del Sistema Nacional de Investigadores. Ha realizado estancias de investigaciones en el Okinawa Institute of Science and Technology, en Japón, y en la Universidad de Memphis, en Estados Unidos. Trabajó como técnico académico en el Centro de Estudios Filosóficos, Políticos y Sociales, Vicente Lombardo Toledano. Fue estudiante asociada del Instituto de Investigaciones Filosóficas del UNAM y miembro de la 4E Cognition Group. Actualmente es profesora por horas en el Centro de Investigación en Ciencias Cognitivas, es decir, aquí en el 5. Cuenta con publicaciones en revistas indexadas internacionales, Frontiers in Psychology, Frontiers in Psiquiatría, Adaptive Behavior, and the Journal of Mind and Behavior. Y desde la maestría ha buscado abordar sus temas de investigación bajo una perspectiva interdisciplinar, así como integrar la investigación teórica con la incidencia práctica en temas socialmente relevantes. Su investigación actual gira en torno a la relación entre los hábitos y el yo, desde una perspectiva enactiva. Den un aplauso, por favor, a la doctora Susana.
Gracias, Jorge, gracias por la invitación al coloquio y por estar aquí. Bueno, voy a dar mi charla en inglés, disculpen mi inglés, pero creo que es para las invitadas internacionales, entonces espero que me entiendan, porque que no sale contraproducente. Bueno, voy a hablar, la presentación, es un título largo, Lacking Meaningful Connections, Loneliness as a closure of the affordance space during the COVID-19 pandemic. Esta investigación es como un condensado de un artículo que acabo de mandar para un journal, entonces está en revisión, entonces, bueno, cualquier comentario se agradecerá mucho. Bueno, primero voy a dar el summary en español y ya después paso al inglés. Primero voy a dar la introducción, hablar sobre la soledad, pues qué ha sucedido con el tema de la soledad, con los niveles de la soledad durante los lockdowns en el COVID, un repaso súper rápido de algunos estudios y que nos van a dar como algunas claves sobre la soledad, ¿no? La idea es que la gente ha estado, pues como un experimento social en cierta medida, porque pues por primera vez en nuestra vida estamos, o sea, estuvimos en ese periodo como todos, casi el mundo solo, sin ninguna posibilidad sin una posibilidad a vista de salir de esa soledad, ¿no? Y luego, ¿por qué elegí la noción de affordance space para caracterizar la soledad? Y voy a hablar de 3 fuentes potenciales de soledad durante los lockdowns. En esto me voy a basar principalmente en una survey, en una encuesta en línea que realizaron en OIS, Tom Prose y otros colegas en otras universidades. Y bueno, después diré unas conclusiones.
Sí estaba funcionando.
A lo mejor.
Ahí está.
Sí.
Since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, there has been a concern among specialists that sustained physical distancing measures that have been taken to decrease the spread of the coronavirus could lead to large increases in loneliness. From all the potential detrimental effects of these physical distancing measures, loneliness has been underscored as one of the most critical ones, given the wide range of mental and physical health problems that are associated with it, such as depression, anxiety, substance use, cognitive decline, cardiovascular diseases, sleep disturbances, and suicide risks.
Que no llegue. Pues sí que es fácil.
Some of the first cross-sectional studies in places such as Hong Kong and United States provided preliminary support to these concerns, reporting higher mean levels of loneliness among the general population compared to data published before the outbreak. However, results from longitudinal studies are inconsistent. For instance, some studies found relatively stable mean levels of loneliness before and during the outbreak in the United States also and in Norway. Two others report significant increases compared to pre-pandemic levels in Germany and the Netherlands, while one study in Spain found significant reductions in loneliness. Difference in loneliness levels were also found between different groups, such as men and women, younger, middle-aged, and older adults, people with high and low income, introvert and extrovert individuals, just to mention some groups. Back. Next. Okay. Yeah. Okay, I suggest that these inconsistent findings, even though we know they are preliminary and more studies are still needed, can be an expression of one of loneliness' core features. That is, that loneliness is not highly correlated with measures of objective social isolation, such as social network size, number of friends, and frequency of contact. Since loneliness can be experienced even while one is surrounded by many others, or not be experienced at all, even if one is alone. In this regard, loneliness has been described as the distressing and unwelcome feeling of being socially isolated, even when among other people. However, according to Holt-Lundstan, even if social isolation and loneliness are distinct experiences, both of them are characterized by a lack of social connection. However, if we consider what we just mentioned about loneliness, that is a subjective feeling relatively independent of social isolation, there should be a difference in the kind of social connections that are at play for each construct. What lonely people lack, I contend, are not just social connections, but meaningful connections which are not restricted to other people, but extend to the whole domain of interactions, including interactions with other living beings, aspects of a material environment, and even with oneself. Okay. To explore this idea, I suggest conceiving these meaningful connections in terms of affordances, understood as the possibilities for action and interaction that the environment offers to an organism. I'll talk more about affordances later. Specifically, I propose that the feeling of loneliness might result from a closure in a person's affordance space. Although we know that there are several controversies regarding the characterization of affordances, I follow authors such as Chemero and Riedel and Kiberstein in considering affordances not as something that is located inside the individual or in the environment, but in the relationship between the individual and the environment. And given the relational nature of affordances, as I am considering them here, a closure of the affordance space pertains to both the individual and the environment they inhabit in the relation. But why choosing the notion of affordance space? To answer this question, let us first explore two related notions. First, let's consider the notion of landscape of affordances. The Han and colleagues coined this term to refer to all the affordances that are open to a specific form of life and depend on the abilities available to this form of life. At a general level, the notion of form of life, which these authors take from Wittgenstein, refers to the way of life of a kind of animal. At this level, we can say, for example, that a chair affords sitting to a human but not to a fish, different forms of life in this general level, as deep mountain cliff affords climbing to a goat but not to an anteater, for example, and a river affords support to a water bug but not to a dog. But the notion of form of life also, according to these authors, accommodates the wide variety of sociocultural practices found within the human form of life at a different level. In this regard, for example, we can say that we have a form of life as academic that implies certain habits and certain sociocultural practices, and also another form of life, and an architect as a writer, etc. In this regard, our landscape of affordances as human beings is conformed by all the affordances that are open to us as active members of communities, who engage in a myriad of sociocultural practices involving particular repertoires of habits. Riedel and Kiberstein emphasize that the human landscape of affordances is available to us even if no individual perceiver is responding here and now to its possibilities for action. This is so as long as our form of life as human, preserves the abilities, in this case as human, preserves the abilities and practices in which those affordances are embedded. That is, as long as there is at least one human being that is able to detect and act upon the affordances. However, even if during the COVID-19 lockdowns, we can say that all the affordances available to our form of life were still part of the human landscape of affordances, there is a sense in which our lived world was drastically contracted. So we need another notion that captures this dramatic reduction in the possibilities for action that most of us experienced during the pandemic. Okay, and we have the concept of field of relevant affordances. The Han and colleagues also propose a distinction between the landscape of affordances that is available to a form of life and the field of relevant affordances that a particular individual is responsive to in a concrete situation, depending on the individual abilities and concerns. In this regard, according to the Han and colleagues, the field of affordances is a situation-specific, individual excerpt of the general landscape of affordances. This notion is useful to understand what makes an individual to engage with some affordances rather than with others in a concrete situation. Or to put it in other terms, what makes certain affordances become solicitations for a particular agent on a given occasion. A field of relevant affordances, according to these authors, includes 3 dimensions, and I take this diagram from the article. It's width, which represents a number of affordances to which an agent is simultaneously open in a concrete situation. It's depth, that refers to the pre-reflective anticipation of future solicitations in our temporal horizon. The individual affordances height, which expresses the affective intensity of the solicitation. As you see, some are higher than others, some things afford, like the affective allure that we feel we feel when we perceive those affordances is higher in some cases than in others. I suggest that the physical distancing measures that have been imposed in the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic brought about a severe reduction in our fields of relevant affordances. First, the width of our fields contracted, since we suddenly had far fewer affordances available, and as a result, our spectrum of habitual behavior was also dramatically contracted. Also, most of us experienced a contraction in the depth of our fields of relevant affordances, since we had no certainty about when our situation would return to normal, or even if it ever would. However, the notion of a field of relevant affordances does not yet capture precisely the contraction in the possibilities for action experienced during the pandemic, since it only gives us a snapshot of concrete engagements with affordances in particular situations. An alternative that I pursue here is considering an intermediate level between the landscape of affordances that is available to a form of life and the field of relevant affordances that in a particular moment is available to a particular individual. This is the notion of affordance space. As characterized by Sean Gallagher, an affordance space includes the full range of possible affordance fields relative to an individual, that is, the totality of an agent's field of relevant affordances, including the current affordances field plus any possible changes in that field due to changes in physical or cognitive skills or environment. According to Gallagher, each individual has an affordance space that differs from those of other people and that changes in relation to their life stage and also to the sociocultural practices in which the person is embedded. Gallagher also suggests that the affordance space of an individual could suffer a permanent reconfiguration as a result of a severe physical injury or as a result of a mental health problem, which would imply a transformation in the individual's being in the world. I propose depicting the changes in our affordance spaces in terms of transformations in our repertoire of habits, which may result from changes in the agent and or from changes in the environment. In what follows, I will argue that the physical distancing measures that have been implemented during the COVID-19 pandemic brought about a sudden contractions of our affordance spaces that have been an important source of loneliness for some people due to the radical disruption in their deep entrenched habits. Loneliness has been non-exclusively associated with significant life events, such as moving to a foreign country, going through divorce, getting a new job, becoming a parent, or losing mobility in old age. We can all agree that the COVID-19 pandemic is a major life event that has disrupted our habitual interactions with the world. So loneliness can be one undesired consequence if people don't manage to compensate for this disruption. In the remainder of this presentation, I will explore 3 potential sources of loneliness during lockdowns related to disruptions in our possibilities for joint action, for affective regulation, and for embodied social interactions during our virtual world. I will also consider ways in which some people were able to overcome the contraction in their affordable spaces by engaging with new affordances or increasing the affective allure of the existing one. These compensations may have prevented the sharp upsurge in loneliness that was predicted at the beginning of the pandemic. Well, a full lockdown in which people are advised, or in some cases, ordered to stay at home and avoid going out except for essential reasons, offers a clear scenario of a drastic disruption to our affordable spaces. During this pandemic, large-scale lockdown might have prevented people from engaging in most of the activities they regularly did with others, such as having dinner with friends, going for a date, playing board games, dancing with someone at a party, or going to a public place that affords spontaneous social interactions. In addition to the activity itself, doing things with others creates shared experience that strengthens social bonds and also opens the space for further interactions. So lacking these affordances might be a potential source for loneliness. As Dalberg points out, loneliness as a condition when other companionship is absent is a lack of someone to talk to or to do something with. The absence of others can be felt more existentially intense when an important part of oneself is constituted by habitual activities whose relative optimal grip requires a physical presence of others. For instance, a participant from the Pandemic Experience Survey, which, as I told you, provides subjective reports of people's experience during the first wave of the COVID-19 pandemic, expressed this concern in relation to his job. He said, my main complaint is not being able to do my job properly. I run face-to-face groups, and this really is impossible on the screen. I feel a large part of my identity has been lost. Other examples that we can think of include activities such as Aikido, or playing music. While individual practice is recommended to improve their skills, Aikido practitioners require the physical presence of others to display their abilities to the fullest. This is also true for partner dance, for example. In both cases, the other person solicits certain moves and interbodily dynamics that cannot be expressed in isolation. In these kind of cases, the closure of the affordable space means a temporary disruption of the person's habitual identities, which may be experienced as a transient feeling of loneliness. Although the relationship between individual identity and loneliness has not been widely studied, it has been noted that disruptions in a person's identity, which involve profound changes in routines and lifestyle, can trigger or exacerbate loneliness. But even in the extreme case of a large-scale lockdown, some people manage to cope in different ways. For instance, in a study consisting of in-depth interviews with women living alone during lockdown in Slovenia, some informants reported gradually resuming in an online modality the regular activities, which included, for example, psychotherapy, working out with a personal trainer, group exercise classes, or even setting up and leading online classes for others. I will talk more about this online engagement with social engagement. Some younger informants also reported having created or joined online spaces to engage in activities such as reading poetry, drinking cocktails, dating, or having virtual parties. For many people, these online activities compensated for the contraction of their affordable spaces during the pandemic, and even expanded their affordable spaces. Unfortunately, these forms of engagement are not open to everyone. In this regard, for example, older adults that lack the relevant skills, and also people with no access to internet or with poor internet connection, may have experienced a larger contraction in their affordable spaces. This could have been one of the factors contributing to the increases in loneliness found among the elderly population during the COVID-19 pandemic in the longitudinal studies. It is thus fundamental to implement non-technological ways, non-digitally mediated ways of preventing loneliness. A good example of this kind of measures comes from the organization Befriend, which provides support for older neighbors living alone in the UK. Realizing that other people had difficulties for starting and keeping up conversation during lockdown, this organization delivered them activity packs so that they could have something to talk about during the volunteers' phone calls. This activity indeed helped to expand their affordance spaces, giving them both the resources to engage with new affordances and the opportunity to share their experiences with others. Second, a full lockdown also contracted the affordances for effective regulation that we usually take for granted. When we're sad, for example, we might tend to seek the comfort of a particular friend, take a walk through our favorite park, or go to a cozy coffee shop to cheer up. According to Joel Kruger and Giovanna Colombetti, these practices and resources afford regulating our mood toward a desired end state. And when they are used regularly, they become incorporated into our daily lives as a habitual and often experientially transparent part of how we manage our affective states. As when a musician regularly uses her instrument to work through her affective states, say these authors. Having their habitual affordances for affective regulation out of reach may have induced loneliness if people were not able to compensate for their absence. So finding ways to improve the grip on the situation using available affordances or creating new affordances within the restricted space for effective regulation could have been crucial for preventing or reducing loneliness during lockdowns. Again, in the pandemic experience survey, many people reported having been able to cope with loneliness by making phone calls and video calls, writing email, chatting, and to keep in touch with family and friends. Some participants also broadened their affordance spaces to cope with social isolation by taking up some old hobbies and long-forgotten projects. Many others resorted to activities such as gardening, exercising, cooking, baking, reading books, practicing yoga, meditating, listening to music, dancing, gaming, playing a musical instrument, praying, or walking their dogs. This suggests that we can create meaningful connections not only with other people, but also with other living beings, with nature, and with self to overcome or prevent loneliness. As Dalberg notes, one can look for a certain connection, some form of companionship, by having something meaningful to do in one's loneliness. A possibility for emotion regulation involving a meaningful connection to oneself is writing a diary, which was used by some of the participants in the pandemic experience survey. One of the participants said, "I am keeping a COVID diary, and if I want to download, I'll talk to my diary." Keeping a diary was also helpful for some participants to overcome the monotony of the long and unstructured periods under lockdown, and even to temporarily locate themselves in the reality, as you can read in the reports. Our bodies are habituated to certain activities that provide structure and comfort to our daily life. So when they are disrupted, a void and awkwardness seizes us, and the days blend into each other. Hence the importance of keeping a routine as a way to regulate our affective states. Establishing a routine is not about always doing the same thing, but about finding meaningful activities and performing them with a certain consistency, including resting and arranging some special activities such as having dinner with soft light and one's favorite food and music. Another protective factor that could have helped some people to regulate their affective states while they were in physical isolation is a feeling that they were not alone in this, since they were sharing a similar situations with many others, this feeling of togetherness. This feeling of togetherness may have led some people to support others in need, such as a woman from the pandemic experience survey who reported having dealt with loneliness not only by making lots of FaceTiming and phone calls, but also by sending cards and gifts that she bought online for others who are also isolated. Other people may have felt the support from others during this difficult period, which could have helped them to alleviate their feelings of loneliness. And there are some examples also that I will mention. Another example of support during the COVID-19 pandemic is the viral kindness movement in Australia, in which local groups have also been helping their most vulnerable neighbors by dropping in their letterboxes postcards offering them help with shopping or with walking their dogs, as well as checking them in through regular phone and video calls. As Smith and Lin point out, this mobilization of grassroots action has revealed a reservoir of energy and community capacity that might be drawn upon to tackle enduring loneliness and social isolation experienced by many. This feeling of togetherness may have also acted as a background context of security that contributed to expand people's affordance space. Knowing, even implicitly, that I am sharing this experience with others, that others understand what I'm going through, and that I can rely on them for emotional support, can make some aspects of the environment more effectively salient in a positive way, offering the opportunity for engagement. As you notice, a recurring theme among participants in qualitative studies on loneliness during lockdown has been the widespread use of digital media to help them reconnect with the world. However useful these technologies may have been to regain social contact, there is a sense in which the presence of others through the virtual world involves a reduction of the perceptual and interactive possibilities that people habitually afford. Through our lifelong face-to-face interactions with others, we've developed a set of perceptual and interactive habits that have become incorporated as an implicit body memory that make us prone to act in certain ways in particular situations. For instance, we implicitly know that we can get closer to a person to better hear what she's saying or to have more privacy in our conversation. We also know that we can see other people from different angles and get different profiles of them if we move around. However, these possibilities are excluded while interacting through the virtual world. Some possibilities for interaction are also missing in digital communication, such as spontaneously meeting with our co-workers at a coffee area or continuing a discussion at the end of the seminar. The screen just goes off and everything finished and you have to write an email. So it's, okay. Interacting through a video conference app may also disrupt our affective social affordances, since we lack the bodily resonance that, according to Thomas Fuchs, provides a basis for an intuitive, empathic understanding. During face-to-face interactions, our bodies are affected by the subtleties of other people's gestures, tones of voice, postural expressions, and even smells. Moreover, face-to-face communication affords possibilities such as spontaneously hugging a friend in the middle of a conversation, of a sensitive conversation, or offer her a coffee. In virtual interactions, these affective affordances are only partially available, which may reduce the possibilities for meaningful social connections. We can think of this situation in terms of an experienced absence provoked by having the other present, but nonetheless withdrawn, because they don't afford the interpersonal affordances that they habitually do, which may lead us to experience loneliness. Some complaints in this direction were expressed also in the pandemic experience survey. For instance, one participant that regarded that period as the loneliest time of her life reported that using online communication technology was not a great replacement to face-to-face interaction, since some of the emotional component is missing. Another participant also recognized that experiences with technology cannot replace physical contact for things like parties or celebration. And there are also more participants going in that direction. However, many participants also reported having experienced satisfactory interaction through digital forms of communication and also took advantage of the unique possibilities that these technologies afford. For example, one of the participants acknowledged that connecting online rather than face-to-face lends itself to more in-depth conversations, talking about, for example, political issues, each other's experiences, feelings, and dreams, rather than the typical pub chit-chat. For another participant, video conferences afforded a broad range of interaction possibilities, and in general, the internet. She said, I have online group music lessons, did a real online dance party, organized book and meet groups on Zoom, plus done a couple of festivals, great as I might not have been able to afford time and money to attend otherwise. Zoom dance party was hugely fun, more honest, experiencing everyone in their front rows, unmade up, dipping in and out, lived informality. In these last cases, participants managed to compensate, at least temporarily, for the interpersonal affordances that were missing because of lockdown restrictions. We could even say that these new forms of digital interaction extended and enriched not only their affordance spaces, the individual affordance spaces, but also the human landscape of affordances. Oh, sorry, it wasn't the next slide. Okay, so to conclude, as I said, the few longitudinal studies on loneliness during the COVID-19 pandemic that have been published so far present contradictory findings that may point to a core feature of this complex phenomenon: its relative independence from objective social isolation. In this regard, I propose that what lonely people lack are not just social connections, but meaningful connections, not only with other people, but also with themselves, other living beings, and their environment. To better understand this claim, I suggested conceiving loneliness as a result of a closure in a person's affordance space, understood as a whole range of possible solicitations or affordances that might stand out as relevant to a complete individual with a particular repertoire of habits and embedded within certain sociocultural practices. Then I explored 3 related ways in which the COVID-19 lockdown as a major life event could have disrupted our affordance spaces, as well as some strategies that people used to reconfigure it, which might have prevented them from experiencing higher levels of loneliness. A closure in our affordance space can be transient, as in these cases, and lead to a short-term feeling of loneliness. In fact, we all have experienced fluctuating contractions in our affordance spaces in various points in our lives. To counteract this closure, we have the possibility to transform our environment or to form new habits that may help us to reconnect with the world and reopen while reshaping our affordance space. For people who manage to compensate for temporary closures in their affordance spaces during the COVID-19 lockdowns, this experience could have been an opportunity to connect or reconnect with others, with themselves, with the environment, and with the wider community. However, it is an open empirical question if this will continue to be the case if lockdowns keep being extended or after the measures have been reduced. This leads us to one idea that I like to explore in a future work. While transient feelings of loneliness can be positive in that they can motivate us to connect or reconnect with the world, loneliness can also become habitual or chronic, shaping the self and thereby transforming the way a person inhabits the world. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Gracias. Ok. Nuestra siguiente presentación correrá a cargo del doctor Jorge Oseguera, Gamba. Les doy una pequeña semblanza.
Gracias.
El doctor Jorge Oseguera realizó su licenciatura en filosofía en la Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México, donde también obtuvo un diplomado en bioética. Durante su licenciatura llevó a cabo un intercambio en la University of California en Berkeley. Recibió la beca Fulbright García Robles para realizar su posgrado en Florida State University, donde realizó bajo la dirección de Michael Bishop su maestría especializándose en ética evolucionista y su doctorado en teorías del bienestar. Ha dictado clases en la Universidad de Florida y en Colorado, Boulder. Actualmente es profesor e investigador en el Centro de Investigación en Ciencias Cognitivas y su investigación se inclina por las metodologías empíricas e interdisciplinarias como la filosofía experimental para aproximarse a problemas en la ética y la filosofía política. Por favor, denle un aplauso al doctor.
Bueno. Acá acústico. Sí. Gracias. Bueno, muchas gracias a todos. Thank you, everybody. So, as a courtesy for international speakers, I will also be presenting in English. I would also like to invite the other speakers if they want to present in English. I think that could be good also for our speakers, but also to get some feedback from them. Okay, so what I'm going to be presenting today is not really a complete, finalized research. This is more of an invitation about how to start doing some research in the field of well-being. So what I'm going to be arguing is that well-being is a complex topic. It is complex in many different senses. And given that it is complex in these different senses, I think we need a transdisciplinary solution or to do some transdisciplinary research to be able to better understand this phenomenon and to be able to better promote well-being. So let's start first with this sense of complex, the sense of being complicated. So well-being, I think, is a complicated topic because there has been many different theories since the ancient Greeks, since Confucius. So there's many different ways of understanding what well-being is. And in all these years, we've still been in a stalemate. So there's not been a lot of progress. There's not really a consensus about what well-being is. And in this sense, I think it is complex. So I'm just going to talk briefly about some of the main theories so that you get an idea, and so that I can explain how we can solve this complexity or this complicated state that the debate is in. So first we have hedonism. So this is one of the first theories about well-being. It's very ancient, but it has very contemporary defenders like Bramble. It also has some scientific defenders like Daniel Kahneman. So we can see that it's still a life theory both in philosophy and in the science of well-being. So basically, hedonism says that well-being is about feeling good. It's about how we feel, and it's something very subjective in that sense. But other theories agree that it is something subjective, but it's not just about how we feel, but about how we think about our lives. So it is not something affective, as in hedonism. It's not about how it feels, but it's something more cognitive, right? It is about how we are understanding our own lives. Another one is so let me explain these two different ones. So one is about the satisfaction with life theory, is this more subjective one that I was talking about, which has been defended by Sopner and also Ed Diener. So here we can also see that there's some defenders both in philosophy and in the science of well-being. Another theory says that it is not just about how we feel, about how we think of our lives, but about achieving what we want, achieving our goals, satisfying our desires, basically. That is also, it could be understood as the theory of subjective satisfaction, but also it's known as the theory of desire satisfaction. This theory has been defended by Heathwood, a contemporary philosopher, but also in economics, this is a big theory. Eric Agner, he's a philosopher, but he analyzes how this is the implicit theory in mainstream economics. So we can also see that it has defendants both in science and philosophy. And finally, a last one that I would like to talk about is virtue theory, which could be traced back to Aristotle, but also has some contemporary defenders, such as Martin Seligman, who is basically the founder of positive psychology, which is this specialization of psychology on these positive aspects of our psychological life. So we can see that these are very old theories and they still have some contemporary defenders. There's not much consensus being made. And we can see that these different theories have been applied to operationalize them and to measure how much well-being people have, or even countries, right? So there's measurements in the policy sciences that use some of these theories to construct instruments and try to measure what's going on. So for example, we have hedonism here. We have all these different measures that have been designed to study hedonistic well-being. But nowadays they're being used to evaluate public policies, and that could be a little bit problematic because they are assuming a particular type of conception of well-being and assuming that the population shares that conception. So several philosophers have pointed out that this could be a little bit paternalistic, or that there's some paternalistic issues there, since they might be the governments might be using public funding to promote a conception of well-being that people might not be interested in. So that could be problematic. And I think that there's a way to approach that issue, to solve that issue. And this solution is offered by Michael Bishop. He proposes a theory that he calls the positive causal network theory. And what he basically does is takes the main elements of these four theories and analyzes how they are related. And he has a lot of empirical evidence to back this up. So he says, okay, well, virtue theory tells us that virtue is important for well-being. We could call these positive traits. So we can study those. Scientists of well-being have been studied those, such as Martin Seligman. We could also study successful interactions with the world. Many scientists have also been studying those. We could study positive feelings. We could study positive attitudes, such as being satisfied with our life, being optimistic, etc. So what he has analyzed is how the scientists that are studying well-being, positive psychologists, have found that all these elements are causally related. And what Michael Bishop claims is that we can study these networks of all these elements that are causally connected and how they interact. So he calls these networks positive causal networks. I think what I've been proposing in Spanish is to call them procesos RISA, which stands for, it's an acronym for the four elements. So I think this gives us a very good model to start taking into account many different elements that people might be interested in, that might be important in how they conceive of well-being. Maybe these are not all the elements that we should include, but maybe we could include more elements, maybe such as meaning in life, other elements that could be important for well-being. Another important aspect of this theory is that it includes the feedback loops. So feedback loops are something central in this theory. So let me explain a little bit how this works. So we could have some positive traits. Imagine somebody that is a very extroverted person, somebody that is very friendly. This trait might lead this person to have some successful interactions with the world, such as having meaningful friendships, having success in their work or in whatever they have as goals. And having success in this sense might cause them positive feelings, such as happiness, other types of feelings, and these types of feelings might also lead to positive attitudes such as being optimistic in life, being satisfied with their life, and at the same time, these positive attitudes might reinforce these positive traits. So this is not just a speculation. There's empirical evidence about all these connections that I'm pointing out. We can talk about in the Q&A about the details. But the important point here is that a feedback loop is being created so that we cannot study just these processes in this linear way. That increasing happiness, for example, might increase optimism, and that might increase other positive traits. And that is going to create a feedback loop. So just adding one thing is not just going to directly impact on another element, but is going to create this very complex network of interactions. So it's not just this circular interaction, but there's also causal interactions in these other directions. So what we can see here is that a very complex network emerges, and we need to study this in terms of dynamical complex systems. This is a phenomenon that is basically inspired in the work of Barbara Fredrickson. If anybody is familiar with her work, she kind of described these processes. But what Michael Bishop does is just to expand that basic idea to include other elements that she was not including. So now let me go to the third sense in which the study of well-being is complex, and it is that it is a multi-level phenomenon. So we already mentioned how this could be going on in a personal level, but I think there's also complexity in the sub-personal level, we could call it. So there's a lot of research about the importance of the vagus nerve. Is that the term in English? Nervio vago? The vagus nerve. And its role in positive emotions, in meaning in life, in regulation of emotions, in executive functions, in prosocial behavior, in biopsychosocial resilience, mobility, and even the time that one spends in nature. So apparently, what they've discovered is that if we have a good vagus functioning, it might give us more disposition to spend more time in nature and maybe have more positive attitudes toward the environment and maybe take more care about of the environment. So what they found, or what at least these authors argue, is that a good functioning of the vagus nerve is fundamental to maintain well-being. So this is just an example of how the subpersonal level of well-being could be important, not just for the personal level, but also how we relate to our environment, and then how we take care of our environment. And if we take care of our environment, we might be living in a more comfortable environment. So that creates a lot of interactions between different levels. So now we could go to a supra-personal level, where we have social well-being. So when individuals interact, their different elements will be causally related to. So for example, I might have a positive trait like being friendly, and that might create some more openness traits in others. So if I present myself as somebody friendly, then that other people might take me in a more open way, and that is going to create many different types of interactions among people. So if we already have this complex system going on at the individual level, when we put other individuals together, it creates an even more complex network. I think another important aspect to study is how the sociopolitical or economic system plays a role in social relationships, how that impacts the environment, and how that can indirectly impact the well-being of people. I think also culture has a big impact on our well-being, and let me just put two brief examples. So one way in which culture can affect our well-being is that if we are raised in a culture where health is something important, where we have this preventive health culture, then that would have a positive impact in our health, and that will have a positive impact in our well-being. But also, our culture gives us particular conceptions of well-being. So if we are living in an environment where we're bombarded with publicity telling us that what we have to do is just to make more money, buy a faster car, etc., then that is going to give us a particular idea of what is important in life, what is important for well-being, and that is going to lead us to act in particular ways. So that is another element that I'm going to expand a little bit more on this later in the talk, but it is something important to consider. So these are just some examples of how this supra-personal level is important for well-being. And just to sum up this little section, we have at least these three different levels in which we can analyze well-being. So we have a complex network that takes place in many different levels of analysis. So here, this is a little map that I don't pretend it to be. I don't think that it is an exhaustive map. I think there's many other elements to analyze, but I just wanted to point out some connections just to emphasize how complex this could be. So here we have well-being and the positive causal networks, or these RISA processes. They are impacted by health, as I explained. They can also be impacted by material conditions, and if we have certain level of well-being, we might be acting in a particular way, and that is also going to be impacting our material conditions. So for example, if we have high well-being, we might be feeling better, we might be more friendly, that might lead us to better professional outcomes, and that might help us improve our material conditions. Being more friendly might also impact our social conditions. And then we have public policy here. I think public policy is an element that is going to play a very important role. I mean, this is something that is obvious. We can see, at least here in Mexico, everything is about well-being now, right? All the public policies are, I don't know, gas for well-being, the bank of well-being, which is, I think it's something that makes sense, right? I think that public policy should be aimed at least ultimately to improve the well-being of the population. So public policy can impact all these elements in many different ways. So public health policies can help us improve our health and therefore improve our well-being. It could help us improve our material conditions, our social conditions, but also it could have an impact in culture. So public governors or people making decisions about cultural public policy could decide to, I don't know, foster certain types of documentaries that emphasize the importance of nature in life. They could maybe limit the type of advertisement that is being presented to young people in the schools, for example. That could have an impact on their health. So public policy, I think that through culture can have a very important impact and indirectly have an impact on how we conceive about well-being. So by impacting our conception of well-being, we could also be impacting indirectly our well-being. There's been many studies about how having a hedonistic conception of well-being could be self-facing, so you could be undermining your own well-being. The idea is that if you're just too worried about just feeling good, then you might not be paying attention to the things that are important to sustain feeling good, like having a job that fulfills you, or having friendships that are going to help you when you're not feeling well, and those sort of things. So I think that a central issue or a central element in this network is going to be conceptions of well-being, and that's the main topic that I've been researching lately, and I want to talk a little bit later about how I've been approaching this topic. So finally, we have that well-being is what some theorists called wicked problem. In Spanish, I translated it as a problema retorcido, but also problema intrincado. That could be another way of understanding it, but I think retorcido captures this wicked part, that there's something like bad there, or problematic, or evil, I don't know. So basically, this is how they defined the conception of wicked problem. It refers to complex problems for which there are no final solutions, because any solution generates other problems, where solutions are not really true or false, good or bad, but just the best solutions that we could have at that moment. So I think this is what is going on with well-being. There, we won't ever have, I don't think we should be aspiring to have like a perfect conception of well-being, a perfect public policy or set of public policies, but we can start trying different things, seeing how changes in some parts affect the whole network, and start to evaluate which set of factors or different indexes in different factors can be giving us better or worse levels of well-being. So, for example, if we adjust how somebody conceives well-being, that's going to affect their conduct, that's going to affect many other things, which will eventually affect their well-being. But that would also have impacts with how they relate with other people, and maybe change how they organize with others to change public policies. These are just some ideas about how complex this phenomenon is. So in that sense, I think this is not a problem that will ever have a solution, that we're just going to have to be trying different things and see what works, what we can improve time by time. But once we improve something, other problems might arise, and we might have to find solutions for those problems. So in that sense, I think that the study of well-being or research about well-being is complex in this five senses. And because of that, we need a transdisciplinary solution. So let me explain a little bit more. I think we need the philosophy to help us mediate in a way between the different disciplines that have to be involved. It can also help us to tease out different types of conceptions of well-being. We need to involve medicine. As we saw, the vagus nerve is very important. We need to involve economists, anthropologists, psychologists, statisticians, and even people from public policy. And not just these disciplines, but we also need to involve the authorities and people in power, people that are making important decisions, to start a dialogue so that we can know exactly what kind of feedback, what type of information they would find useful to make decisions about this. And moreover, so this is the sense in which I think it has to be transdisciplinary. Not only we need to join many different disciplines, but we also have to go outside academia, beyond the disciplines, and put it in practice with people that are making decisions that affect everybody. But also another characteristic of transdisciplinarity, or at least a characteristic that some people have mentioned, is trying to go beyond this type of knowledge, this more academic knowledge, and try to reach for local communities or indigenous communities that might have some knowledge about the environment, but also about some rituals. So, for example, there's a lot of research right now about psychedelics, about how these shamanic rituals can have a very important impact on well-being. So what I propose is not just to join all these disciplines and also make efforts with the authorities, but also be more open-minded about many other things that could be helping us improve well-being. So just as a little example, I mean, the ideal way of proceeding, the ideal methodology would be to start modeling all these elements and their relationships in a complex dynamic system way. I'm not an expert on that at all. I have very few understanding about the topic, but I would love to start collaborating with people if anybody would be interested in that, or if you know of somebody that could be interested. That's part of the research that I'm trying to propose. But also I want to talk about the research that I've been doing myself, which is trying to understand better the conceptions of well-being and trying to design an instrument to be able to measure how people understand well-being. There's many efforts in this sense. I think they have the work that has been done previously has some deficiencies. But for this, I started developing a transdisciplinary team, which includes Mariano Rojas, who is an economist. He's a very big figure in the study of well-being in Latin America, particularly. Viviana Ramirez, who does international relationships or international affairs. Roberto Castellanos from political sciences. Juan Jaime Loera from anthropology. And Alfonso Juan Mendez, who is a psychologist, but also has a PhD in interdisciplinary studies. So here we can see that we're including a lot of disciplines that could bring many different feedback, many different points of view to determine what is important to measure in conceptions of well-being. So the idea would be to have a questionnaire or maybe a protocol for interviews so that we could use all that information to better design public policies. If we better understand how people conceive well-being or what they think is important for well-being, then we can direct all the resources that we have to really try to improve well-being in the sense that people are worried about. We could also better understand how the way we conceive of well-being affects our own well-being. We could also start studying how these conceptions of well-being are formed, how cultural and other types of factors shape the way we conceive of well-being. And we could also figure out how to foster or disincentivize particular conceptions of well-being that we could find problematic. So, for example, since we have a lot of evidence that hedonism doesn't really lead to life satisfaction or having well-being, similar studies have been developed that point out that materialism, or this idea that our well-being consists a lot of the material possessions that we have, they have discovered that those conceptions lead us to diminished well-being. So we can start trying to determine how to disincentivize those type of more problematic conceptions of well-being. Okay, so I ran a little bit to catch up with the time, but I think we still have time for Q&A, right? Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. Questions first?
I've got a couple of questions for you, Jorge. Thank you very much, very interesting. I'm going to go back to the abstract philosophical level, so my apologies.
Sure.
A lot of the dimensions that you suggested constitute Bishop's idea of well-being are based on traditional theories, right?
Mm-hmm.
And traditional theories, from my point of view, make a lot of sense when we think individually.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm feeling good, I'm having pleasure, stuff like that. But when we go to the upper level and we think about social well-being, for example, it is metaphysically tricky because it seems that we need to postulate a better of the property. So my first question is, do we need to postulate something like a super-agent or a supra-individual or a macro-individual in order to talk about well-being? Or social well-being is just the sum of individual well-being? So that would be my first question, comment. And the second one is perhaps embedded in the way we talk. So if I ask you, how are you, Jorge? And you reply, not bad, Francisco, not bad.
Mm-hmm.
That seems to imply a sort of a relational or negative conception of well-being. And that makes a lot of sense, for example, not only individually, but also socially. In many cultures, we say something like, no, we are okay, we are fine, we are doing great, we are feeling great, because we are making a comparative judgment. For example, in contrast with other cultures, in contrast with a different friend who's having a terrible time right now. So that would be my two comments.
Okay, thank you. Yes, very good comments. Particularly, I think both are very interesting, and I think they both pose important problems. But I want to start with the second one. So yes, well-being in a way, or at least life satisfaction, as some theories have studied it, is very comparative, right? So I think that is one of the reasons why this is a wicked problem, because we might start raising, I don't know, we can improve the material conditions of people. That might increase their level of well-being, but then they might want more, right? They might say, okay, now I have this level of well-being, but now I can aspire for more. So then that creates new problems. Then that leads us to try to figure out other measures to take the well-being further. So in that sense, well-being is like health. So many years ago, if somebody died at 50 years, then they considered that was normal, that was he could have been a very healthy person and died at 50. But nowadays, if we die at 50, that means that we weren't very healthy, unless there was an accident or something like that, right? So in that sense, I think the concept of well-being is an evolving concept, and that is one of the reasons why it becomes a very complex and problem, and a problem that has no final solution. Regarding the first one, I don't know. I don't want to commit myself to saying that there's such a thing as a meta entity that experiences well-being, but I think well-being is experienced in the individuals. But maybe the other elements that are not necessarily related to an experience can be understood or conceptualized as creating this meta phenomenon. Not really an entity or a mind, but an emerging level that is important to analyze, because that has an impact in the lower level, which is the level of the people that are actually experiencing well-being. So that's how I would handle that issue. I don't know if that's satisfactory. Thank you.
It's a question for you, Jorge.
Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. I found it very interesting. But I was really struck by the fact that you don't include phenomenology in the disciplines likely to inform us on what is well-being, because well-being is essentially something we live. It's an experience we live. We feel well or unwell. So I would find very interesting to explore this experience. And I'm surprised that you didn't say a word about the experience, or very little.
Mm-hmm.
So why? And my question is why?
Yes, that's a very good point. So there's some theories that lend themselves more to a phenomenological analysis, like hedonism, right? So according to hedonism, well-being is about how we feel, how we experience things. But there are other theories that say that that's not at all the case, that well-being is not something subjective, that it is something objective. That if a person is achieving things, they might not be enjoying achieving those things, but the fact that they're achieving those things is what makes their life to go well. I know this is a very counterintuitive theory. Myself, I don't agree much with that. But that's one reason why I didn't pay much emphasis. But another sense in which phenomenology is important is that it can also help us to understand our conceptions of well-being. So one of the members in the team that I mentioned, he's been working on these phenomenological interviews to understand or try to abstract the conceptions of well-being that the person being interviewed has. So phenomenology as a field of study or as a methodology can be very useful also in that sense. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Tengo también una pregunta sobre el modelo. Está claro que cuantas más cosas introduzcamos en el modelo, mejor se va a ajustar el modelo a los datos que tenemos.
Uh-huh.
Pero también le estamos quitando poder explicativo. Entonces, presentas un modelo que es muy complejo, pero a lo mejor un modelo más, o sea, ¿habéis hecho algún tipo de comparación para decir, mira, utilizando simplemente 3 parámetros, nuestra capacidad predictiva es increíblemente... Obviamente tenemos menos capacidad predictiva, pero nuestro modelo es mucho más sencillo. Entonces, simplemente cambiando estas 3 cositas, es verdad que todo esto afecta, pero estas 3 cositas son muy fáciles de cambiar y con ello incrementamos mucho el well-being. Y luego ya tenemos en cuenta todas las demás cosas que nos darían cuenta de qué cosas hay, el número de neuronas que las personas tienen. O sea, podemos llegar a un grado de finura increíblemente grande que nos permita decir, mira, de verdad para cada persona lo podemos hacer así, pero claro, ese tipo de modelos no son muy útiles. Entonces, ¿dónde encuentras el equilibrio? ¿O cuál es la metodología a seguir?
Sí, bueno, el life satisfaction has been one of those. No problem. No worries. Yeah, so the question is how, if there's a way to make the model a little bit less complex so that we can focus on the things that are more important, right? That's the basic idea. And one of the elements that have been found to be more related to all these other elements is satisfaction with life. So basically, satisfaction with life seems to be tracking well many other different conceptions of well-being. So if you are high on well-being in this hedonistic sense, you also have high life satisfaction. If you are if you're flourishing in the sense of these positive psychologists, then you're also going to have life satisfaction. So I think maybe we could focus on that, but just focusing on life satisfaction, I think, leaves out many other things that would be important, particularly when we're talking about public policy. So I guess my short answer would be yes, I think that there might be a way of making this less complicated and more parsimonious, but I have no idea how to achieve that. And that is something that I would like to eventually work on. But I think that's a very important point on how to make this system a little bit less complex so that it's easier to study it, right? Is that the idea? Okay, thank you.
Tenemos 3 preguntas más.
I would just like to say if there are questions also for the other speakers, maybe we could prioritize those so that I don't want to monopolize all the conversation, but is there another one?
Yo aprovecho para hacer una cada uno. La primera, Jean-Philippe, si puedes explicar un poquito más, de manera breve, la relación entre humor y ética, que no me quedó tan claro en tu ponencia. Para Susana, si, bueno, al final como, o sea, muy interesante tu presentación, pero me quedé como con la sensación de al final, ¿qué es lo que esta interrupción o clausura del espacio adiciona a la explicación, ¿no? O sea, es decir, bueno, no todo la investigación empírica y de las encuestas que nos enseñaste aquí al respecto de, ¿no?, de toda la interrupción social que tenemos en nuestras relaciones, en fin. Entonces al final, tú dices, bueno, al final lo que está pasando es que tenemos una clausura, ¿no? Closure of our... ¿cómo lo llamas?
Affordance.
Affordance, exacto, una closure of affordance. Eso como que, ¿qué añade al final a la explicación de todo lo que nos estabas diciendo? Yo como que me perdí un poquito ahí. Y a Jorge, ¿cómo entra en tu modelo emociones o sentimientos como el Schadenfreude, por ejemplo, que es ¿no?, este sentido de felicidad, de gozo que te da el sufrimiento, la desgracia de otro? Gracias. Disculpa también que sea en español.
Jean-Philippe.
Sí, la relación que hay entre humor y ética es que para los surrealistas no hay valores absolutos. Es decir, que todo valor puede ser aniquilada por el humor.
Sí, gracias. Sí, yo también me pregunto constantemente qué añade tomar la perspectiva subjetiva y fenomenológica a los datos, pero creo que son diferentes niveles de entender la realidad. Y yo creo, también para mí era muy importante entender por qué hay esas variaciones. O sea, por qué de pronto, claro, se espera que vayan a subir muchísimo los niveles de soledad. Y pues sí, unos dijeron, bueno, se mantiene el promedio, otros, bueno, pues más o menos subió en algunos grupos y en otros bajó, incluso bajó. O sea, gente, por ejemplo, que tenía en algunos estudios, porque también hay muchas inconsistencias en cuanto a metodología y también en cuanto a, por ejemplo, lockdown, cuánto duró, en qué países, etc. Pero, ¿por qué en algunos fue muy alto? ¿Por qué en unos grupos fue muy bajo? Y también me interesa saber cómo los diferentes elementos que están involucrados. O sea, los affordances es algo que no solamente, normalmente se toma la soledad como algo subjetivo y algo que depende solo del sujeto, ¿no? Pero bueno, ¿cómo interactúan? ¿Cómo en esta interacción de un sujeto con su entorno se van conformando estos affordances? A veces puede estar ahí el affordance para la forma de vida, pero para mí, por ejemplo, que tengo ansiedad social, puedo no tomarla, ¿no? Entonces, ahí está la parte del individuo, pero también por el lado del entorno, ¿no? O sea, ciertas políticas públicas, como por ejemplo decir, claro, todo el mundo se puede comunicar por el Internet, no todo el mundo se puede comunicar por el Internet. Poblaciones en las cuales no pensamos, ¿no? Por ejemplo, muchas de estas encuestas fueron en línea y mucha gente quedó, no se representada ahí. Entonces, creo que además de añadir o sea, es muy importante, por supuesto que son muy importantes los estudios cuantitativos y es casi donde todo el presupuesto está, y está bien que esté en el presupuesto también los estudios cuantitativos, pero también me parece que es importante como desmenuzar las experiencias y no nada más que se piense que es algo que está dentro del sujeto, está solo, se siente solo, bueno, o sea, ¿en qué sentido se puede dar, por ejemplo, un entorno mucho más amigable para que la gente no se sienta sola? Y no es solamente como adicionarle más gente, ¿no? O poner, vamos a hacer una actividad colectiva. Bueno, hay que tomar en cuenta las subjetividades, hay que tomar en cuenta cómo diferentes personas viven en un entorno. Entonces, por eso a lo mejor, pues, ¿qué añade más? Pues, no lo sé realmente, como no te sé decir exactamente, pero esa es mi perspectiva, ¿no? Y el interés que tenían en realizar este trabajo.
Ok, tenemos una pregunta pequeña pendiente.
Sí.
No, rápido, sí, creo que es un caso muy interesante, ¿no? El Schadenfreude, me imagino que lo que estás teniendo en mente es que es algo que nos puede producir placer y que en ese sentido puede aumentar nuestras emociones positivas, pero al mismo tiempo es muy problemático, ¿no? Entonces creo que es un ejemplo interesante porque vemos cómo aumentar el bienestar en un aspecto puede al mismo tiempo aumentar el malestar en la sociedad, ¿no? Entonces, sí, no sé, no lo he pensado mucho, pero creo que es un caso muy interesante de estudiar para ver cómo se dan estas dinámicas, ¿no? En las que aumentas el bienestar en un lado, pero...
Solo pensé con la red causal.
Exacto. Sí, sí, gracias.
I have a question for Jorge. So I am also interested in the question of well-being, but I study it from the perspective of animal well-being. And in animal ethics, it's very, very common to use the distinction by Parfit between hedonism, preference, satisfaction theories, and objective list theories. So that's always kind of how I think about these topics. So I was wondering if the model you're presenting here is an objective list theory of well-being, because everything you listed could be kind of interpreted in subjective terms. And when you talk, for instance, about how people who follow hedonistic approach to well-being, actually how that's detrimental to their well-being, I was wondering if you were thinking of that in terms of subjective well-being. So yeah.
Yes, good, very good question. Yeah, I think objective list theories are interesting, but the issue that I have with those theories is that it's not clear what unifies them, what they all have in common. And also it is not clear if those elements are constitutive of well-being or are they just causally related. So, for example, Mariano Rojas, he makes the distinction between the drivers of well-being, which are the things that contribute to well-being but don't really constitute to well-being. So the theory that I'm presenting here, I mean, it's a good question, right? All these elements, are they constitutive or just causal? And I think the theory differs from objectivist theories in the sense that this theory explains what they all have in common, which is that they are causally related. Right? I think that's one advantage that this theory has over objectivist theories. You can explain that thing that objectivist theories can't. But it also raises those types of concerns. Are these elements constitutive, all of them, just some of them, or are they just causally contributing to
right,
well-being?
But can there be like an increment in someone's well-being without a subjective correlate, according to this model?
I mean, do you have any particular case in mind?
For instance, the issue of meaning. Well, it wasn't on your list, but you mentioned it. Like someone can have a meaningful life without it necessarily making them more like happier or more satisfied with their life. Would your model accommodate that notion?
I mean, I think it's a possibility, but what we see from empirical evidence is that all these elements are related causally in a way that if you improve one of them, the other ones are going to be improved. So I think I would leave that just as a matter of empirical evidence, right? It's an empirical issue, something that could be determined. But yeah, I think that raises also some metaphysical questions, right? What is constituting well-being or what is just contributing to? Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. So go to the lunchtime.
Oye, sí tenemos que trabajar en la
Sí, creo que todo se trata de esta.
Sí.
Ay, cuando pienso en, no sé, en cosas del nervio vago, como que lo capto.
Es que llevo mucho tiempo trabajando en el nervio vago, yo, o sea, haciendo como respiración de para el nervio vago y todo, porque he visto que están haciendo un chorro de cosas. Aparte, hay unos estudios que ven el daño en el nervio vago a partir del COVID. O sea, el COVID afecta tantos órganos porque pasan por el nervio vago. Es como, entonces, es que perdí afecta el funcionamiento, por eso da al riñón, por eso hay daños en el corazón, por eso. Entonces los daños sistémicos que estamos hablando